Welcome back to the Inside Nebraska Recruiting Blitz podcast. I'm Tim Verghese, as always. Solo show today, just after, it was a quiet recruiting week for Nebraska. Small group of visitors in from Northern Iowa, short week this week. Expecting a group of visitors coming in for Illinois, but that's going to be a small list as well, given that it's a Friday night game. We're going to get right into it. Going to keep it short and sweet here. One thing we didn't get to touch on last week, just because we recorded before it happened, Christian Jones, four-star in-state linebacker, announced his commitment to Nebraska last Monday night. That was a big addition for Nebraska. Obviously, we've talked all off season about how he was the number one target left on the board, pretty much going into the season, the top target on the board, regardless of position. Just a top 100 player at linebacker, a top 100 in-state prospect, number one player in the state, and a guy Nebraska really needed at a position of need. And one that's now in the boat and doing his part as a peer recruiter, doing his part. He was back on campus for the Northern Iowa game, so he's doing his part. He's locked in, and it was a good win for Nebraska. He made it known after his commitment too that at one point this summer, he was thinking he was going to go to Oklahoma. So it was a good win over Oklahoma for Nebraska. They've had a couple of those this cycle. They still could get one more. They're still in pursuit of trying to flip Cortez Mills from Oklahoma, but with KP track, one that was trending Oklahoma's way for a long time, Nebraska was able to get that done in the summer and flip momentum away and land him in July. Same thing with Christian Jones. That was one that was trending Oklahoma's way in the summer, and now he's a Nebraska Cornhusker. He's staying home, and we're talking about Christian just in terms of the prospect Nebraska's getting and what this means for the program. Jones is a guy that's really, really athletic. You look at his track times, you look at some of the testing numbers, you look at what he does in the weight room. Just a really impressive athlete. A guy that has either gotten real close to sub 11 or has been right on that mark. Which again for his size, really impressive. Stands around 6'3", 225 right now. Looks the part, moving around. You watch him kind of in space. He's fluid in space. Can really run downhill. You see him play on both sides of the ball for Westside. He's helped lead them to back-to-back state championships. They're hoping for a third straight this year. And he's a guy that can stick with receivers, can stick with running backs, can sit with tight ends in coverage. Constantly around the ball. Does a really good job of using his eyes and getting to the backfield. He's like a violent tackler. He's what you look for in a modern day linebacker. If you're to nitpick on something, I guess, with him that Nebraska will need to develop and things with him that just need to come along. It's just being more instinctive and not being reactive, but being proactive. There's times where you'll see him on film, or even I've seen him in person a couple of times now, but you see him in person and the play's developing and he's staying patient and reading out the play, but he ends up reacting rather than just trusting his instincts and going and shooting and firing downhill or firing on the ball. So that's just something that'll come with time too. You see it. I think something big with him that Nebraska was able to check off was just showing how much they're developing the linebackers position specifically under Rob Dvorak. You saw it's the play of John Bullock and Mekhi Baird and what that's meant for this team and how good those two have been early on this season, how fast they look in space, how well they trigger on the ball, how comfortable they are in the scheme. And that's something you hope with Christian Jones, in 1-2 years in the system, he's able to get to that point. He's a guy that can come in on campus, is pretty ready made to play physically. He said, he kind of trusts the staff to do what they need to do to add weight to him or even reduce weight if needed. He can play it all through linebacker spots, potentially even play, somewhat of that hybrid jack position where, he's a jack that doesn't always come off the edge, but kind of drops into space at times. See Prince will do that currently in the scheme sometimes. See MJ Sherman do that as a current jack in the scheme sometimes. So that's kind of like the role for Christian Jones. He could also play like a true middle linebacker, a weak side linebacker. It can kind of fit into all three linebacker spots. Gives you some versatility there. A guy that should be able to find some playing time for sure, at least on special teams in year one, and as he comes along within the system, could potentially earn some starting playing time, could just earn some playing time in general as a freshman. And obviously, again, cannot understate how big of an addition this is for Nebraska. And I know it's about a week late, but we had the coverage over at Inside Nebraska. Be sure to stay tuned in to all our coverage on recruiting over there. But that's talking Christian Jones. Nebraska's newest addition to the 2025 class. In terms of where Nebraska goes from here in 2025, there's nothing really imminent. They're in pursuit of some flips. still in pursuit of Michael Terry. He was back at Texas this past weekend. The Longhorns are trying to maintain their position at the top of that recruitment. But as we reported last week, we feel like Nebraska's caught up to Texas, and it's kind of 1A, 1B right now, or neck and neck between the two programs. Heading into a long stretch, kind of strap in for the long haul here. As I said last week, Nebraska's going to have to do some work because he's planning to take his recruitment till December. And so Nebraska's hoping to get him back potentially for another game later this year. There's only a handful of home games left, so those have to start coming together. Those plans have to start coming together here soon for him. In just terms of like, there's only a couple games to pick from. But they could try and get him back in late November during a bye week or even in December before signing day. So Nebraska's going to do their due diligence there and keep chipping away with Michael Terry. We mentioned Cortez Mills. That's one they're still trying to flip. Dawson Merritt, they're trying to flip from Alabama. He had a very productive and positive visit to Nebraska for the Colorado game. Nebraska's made a good impression. They seem to keep winning, especially going into conference play, like kind of show, hey, we're competing, we're competitive in the conference. We can compete for championships just like Alabama can while you're on campus if you were to come to Nebraska or if you were to go to Alabama. I think that's Nebraska's pitch right now. That's what Nebraska's trying to show on the field, and that's really what needs to work for them. Is that's one they just need to keep chipping away as well. That's one that, again, if Nebraska's going to flip, I don't think it comes anytime soon. I think that's one that you keep chipping away, and then come signing day, you turn around and you're like, oh, look, Dawson Merritt, signing day is getting close, and he's kind of undecided, or it's a toss up between who he's going to sign on the dotted line for, whether it's Nebraska or Alabama. As Greg Smith reported last week, as we reported last week, it is pretty much coming down to Nebraska and Alabama. No other schools really involved right now. That could change, with over the course of the season, that could potentially change. But as of right now, we're just expecting it to be Nebraska battling to flip him away from Alabama, Alabama fighting to keep him committed. Their dominant win, Alabama's dominant road win over Wisconsin, should only help their case. And they're going to be competitive in the SEC as well, and so that's just something to keep an eye on. Those are a couple of names to know heading into these last few months of this 2025 cycle. But and I'm sure there's going to be a couple more names that emerge on the radar throughout the course of the season. If Nebraska accomplishes what they want to on the field, recruits are already taking notice. You could see come Rutgers game, come UCLA in November, you could see some surprises, some top 250 players that haven't really been on Nebraska's radar, haven't visited Nebraska a whole lot over the years, maybe make their way in to see what Dylan Raiola is all about, see what Nebraska's offense and Nebraska's team is all about. Switching gears a little bit, just talking about some guys that were in town this past weekend. Again, there's a small group of visitors that were in town. A couple of notable names that hadn't been offered. 2026 Millard South quarterback Jet Tamala and his teammate, 2026 three-star offensive lineman Landon Von Segern, were both in town. Von Segern landed a Big Ten offer last week from Illinois. Nebraska is monitoring him closely. He's a 6'4", 280-pound offensive guard. Would fit what Nebraska kind of looks for on the interior. I think he's a guy to keep an eye on as another 2026 potential offer candidate. Nebraska keeping their 26 QB options open. Tamala's an in-state quarterback with some intrigue. He's lighting it up early this season for Millard South and that loaded offense, basically running Tennessee's offensive scheme, and can definitely get the air under the ball as a dynamic, athletic quarterback at 6'4". Can maneuver the pocket pretty well, can create out of structure, can do a lot of different things. His ceiling is a little unknown right now, kind of what his long-term potential could be in Nebraska's 26 board, as we've mentioned multiple times, at the quarterback position is a little hazy right now, and something that Nebraska needs to gain some clarity on over the course of this year. So that's something, the staff is working to do and working to get together, but keep an eye on Tamala as a potential in-state option, as well as Gretna's quarterback Mike Knutson, and keep an eye on Bellevue West quarterback Will Anderson as well. Those are a couple in-state 26s to know if Nebraska were to offer a 26 in-state quarterback. Those are three, I think, worth keeping an eye on. Another name in town, another 26 quarterback, Rocco Marriott out of Platte County in Missouri. He's an unranked quarterback right now, but a guy that has a couple of D1 offers, a guy that's been on Nebraska's radar, that's visited Nebraska a couple times. Again, doesn't have an offer, but one that, again, depending on how the board shakes out, could be one that's next in line to potentially get an offer. Those are some of the notable guys in town. Like we mentioned, a couple of commits were back in town: Tyson Terry, Christian Jones, Caden Vermas. one notable name, I guess another 26 name notable that we spotted in town. Tyrese Parker is a 6'3" defensive back out of Kansas. Does not have an offer either, but an intriguing athlete. I saw him in the offseason kind of working out at a 7-on-7 tournament, and then saw him at a little combine event. Fascinating athlete at 6'3", like a guy that can really plays on both sides of the ball right now, can create on both sides of the ball. Long-term ceilings best at DB, has a lot of filling out and growing into to do. He's clearly not grown into his 6'3" frame. Has a little baby fat on him, a guy that needs to keep growing and evolving, but a guy that John Butler seems to like early on, a guy that John Butler would like to have. And on that note, inside Nebraska, me and Jansen Coburn are Do It All Creative. We're at West Des Moines Valley on Friday to go see four-star safety Jayden McGregory in the 2026 class. He's a top Nebraska target. We've got analysis on him over at Inside Nebraska. You can go read that right now on our notes and observation piece. When you're watching this, we'll have an interview up with him over at Inside Nebraska as well, where he talks about where Nebraska stands with him. And if you read that story, you'll know Nebraska's at the top right now. He said that outright. Nebraska's his top school in his recruitment. Michigan's another one involved. Illinois is involved. A couple of big Power Four programs are monitoring. He's an intriguing athlete. A guy that's got primarily a basketball background. Started playing football, over the last few years, and is really developing into his own. Really like his frame, 6'2", really rangy, moves really well in space, super fluid hips. Just fluid moving in space, can come downhill in a hurry, moves laterally well, can stick with defenders. And one thing he noted himself, and one thing that I'm curious to watch with him to see how he continues to evolve is his eyes need to improve. Just how he's reading the field from the top down at the safety position. He can kind of get caught with his eyes in the backfield when guys are in or are crossing or into his zone, and he get caught out of position. But that's something that's fixable. That's something that, and John Butler, like I said, this is a guy that John Butler also really likes, a guy that already has an offer and that's a top priority at safety, at free safety, he says, in Nebraska's scheme. And a guy that I think is best, kind of working top down, he might struggle a bit, like chasing guys down overhead. He's got adequate closing speed, but not like elite closing speed by any means. He's fast enough. He plays faster than he probably is. But he's especially good, kind of moving downhill, reading the field top down, versus having to cover things overhead. So curious to see kind of, again, he's got a kind of an undetermined timeline right now. He's eyeing a couple different dates for when he'd want to potentially commit, or has a couple ideas of when he wants to potentially make a decision. But nothing imminent as of right now, but that could change as well. He hopes to get back to Nebraska multiple times, he says, this fall. Again, there's only a handful of games left on the schedule, so we'll see if he's able to make it back into town. But he's a name worth keeping an eye on, a top Nebraska target in 2026. And Nebraska's still looking for that first 2026 commit. It could come from in-state 3-star tight end Isaac Jensen out of Millard South as well. He's visited campus a bunch already. Has Nebraska high on his list, has a couple other Big Ten programs and a couple of national programs on his radar as well. But I think Nebraska, when it's all said and done, is going to be able to secure his talents. Jace Reynolds, another in-state target linebacker in the 2026 class. Nebraska's working on him. He's visited a bunch since he got offered in June. Nebraska's hoping to close with him here at some point this season and, make him either one, if not the first member of the 2026 recruiting class. And there's a couple others as well. Hudson Parliament, 4-star offensive lineman out of South Dakota. Nebraska's high on his list. Probably one of the leaders, if not the leader in that recruitment right now. That's one that I think Nebraska is really close with. It just kind of depends on what his timeline is. And Nebraska would like to get him shut down before some national powers enter the mix, because Alabama and Oregon and a couple of these national powers are monitoring him. And that's just a testament to the evaluation of Nebraska getting in on him as early as they did and the work they've done early on to position themselves at the top. And looking ahead to the Illinois game, again, not expecting a super crazy visitor list just because it's a Friday night game. Most of these players are playing on Friday night. One that isn't playing on Friday night, that's got a bye week and is planning to be in town, 4-star linebacker Jordan Campbell out of Miami. He plays at Carroll City High School down there, and is a guy Nebraska is trying to flip away from Miami. He's committed to the hometown Hurricanes, and he's a top 50 prospect per Rivals, one of the top linebackers in the country. can play inside, can play outside, is uber athletic, fits what Nebraska likes at the position. And a guy that was originally planning to visit for the Colorado game, wasn't able to fit it into his schedule, so now he's coming in for Illinois. As things currently stand, his schedule is a little tentative, but as we currently speak, he's still planning to make it back into town for the Friday night game. Another name worth keeping an eye on: Brandon Arrington, the four-star athlete out of California. He wasn't able to make it down for the Colorado game, but he's hoping to make it back down. He told us after that game he's hoping to make it back down for another visit to Nebraska this month. And he is also on a bye this week, so he could sneak into town on Friday. That's a name worth keeping an eye on as we get closer to that Friday night kick, which is going to be a ranked game. Friday night, ranked Nebraska, Illinois, under the lights of Memorial Stadium. Again, an environment Nebraska would certainly love to showcase for recruits, but because of just the timing of the schedule and the way things kind of worked out, it's just going to be tough for Nebraska to get a whole lot of visitors in. They'll be able to get a couple proximity guys that are potentially on bye weeks or play on Thursday or Saturday this week. They may be able to get some national recruits that happen to be on byes or happen to play a Thursday night game or a Saturday night game this week. But it's just the way that kind of the schedule works out for them. Unfortunately, is they have a nice little 4-week home stretch to start the season, but they can't really take advantage of the last game, which is the first conference game, the first of this 4-game home stretch. Unfortunately, they just can't really take advantage of the potential recruiting opportunity that's there. 2 weeks from now, they'll have Rutgers at home. That'll be another big recruiting opportunity. That list is already starting to come together with some top targets expected in town. Keenan Harris, Jamarian Carlton, a couple of those guys are already planning to be in town. So keep an eye on that. We'll have you posted over here at Inside Nebraska with that list. We've thrown a lot of names at you today. We're not going to take too much longer. Going to get out of here, and but stay tuned to Inside Nebraska for all our recruiting coverage throughout this week, all our football coverage. Steve Merritt and me will be back with the Nebraska football show on Wednesday. We'll have our bold prediction show later this week, potentially even a couple day early or so, just because of the way the schedule kind of works out this week. And on Friday, obviously Nebraska will play Illinois. We'll have all the coverage over there on the recruits that make it into town, on the game itself, the post-game coverage, how Nebraska's looking heading into Big Ten play. And it's a big test coming up for the Huskers, just to kind of see where they stack up in the Big Ten, how they stack up against the conference. And we'll see, if Matt Rhule and his staff can keep this thing rolling.